Thanks to our Patreon members for helping to make this episode possible, and we're now available on all the major podcasting platforms. You can find more information at the links below. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Reading Along with Nietzsche's Beyond Good and Evil. And today we're going to start with the preface and do the first couple of chapters. And wow, we get right into it here. It's a very Nietzsche-like work by Nietzsche. In fact, it may be the most Nietzsche-like work by Nietzsche. I don't know. It's just one that just seems very much, he's coming into his full powers here. And he starts, which is always a danger sign when you're talking about Nietzsche, with a reference to women. Anytime he references women, you can just go, oh God, here we go. But in this case, what he's actually saying, he says, supposing that truth is a woman, what then? Is there not ground for suspecting that all philosophers, insofar as they have been dogmatists, have failed to understand women, that the terrible seriousness and clumsy importunity with which they have usually paid their addresses to truth have been unskilled and unseemly methods for winning a woman? And this is the notion that philosophers have been doing something besides searching for the truth. What they've been trying to do is seduce it, or trying to win it, or trying to corrupt it, or trying to dominate it, or trying to overthrow it. And that this is, in fact, not the correct approach. Like, what they're doing is unconsciously, or in fact, quite literally subconsciously, they've been driven to pursue something in the way that men are driven to pursue women. And that is this is a central concept that he wants to really get in our minds from the inception of this work. Because what he wants to argue is that our desire for truth that is so often expressed and seems so natural and seems, of course, this is what philosophy is supposed to be doing. He's like, I'm not sure that is what philosophy is supposed to be doing. And that rather than just pursuing truth as if this is natural, to him it appears much more like we're just driven by biological needs and by desire and by unconscious wants to, again, dominate, seduce, corrupt, own, all these things the way men act towards women in Nietzsche's view. And so this is a very interesting observation. And they notice that it works both directions. And so normally when he talks about women, you're like, oh God, here we go. But in this case, he's like, oh yeah, men do tend to approach women, particularly in Nietzsche's day, but probably maybe no less today, as an object of something that's to be controlled, desired, captured, owned, right? Like it's all this is it's an attempt to win over and then dominate, not anything else. And he says this unconscious drive, which we'll see mentioned here very, very, very soon, is at the heart of this. And he says, but what if this is a mistake? What if there is some error, though, that's going on here? And he says, let us not be ungrateful, although it must certainly confess that the worst, the most tiresome, and the most dangerous of errors hitherto has been a dogmatist error, namely Plato's invention of pure spirit and the good in itself. So he's not attacking something small here. He's attacking something very central to the Western philosophical tradition and saying, well, this is the greatest of all dogmatic errors, but let's not be ungrateful for it. And he says, that notion of pure spirit and the good in itself, this is the mistake. This is the problem. But now when it has been surmounted, when Europe, rid of this nightmare, can again draw freely and at least enjoy a healthier sleep. Like what? What is he talking about? We whose duty is wakefulness itself are the heirs of all the strengths which the struggle against this error has fostered. It amounted to the very inversion of truth and the denial of perspective, the fundamental condition of life, to speak of spirit and the good as Plato spoke of them. Indeed, one might ask of a physician, how did such a malady attack that finest product of antiquity, Plato? Had the wicked Socrates really corrupted him? Was Socrates, after all, a corrupter of youths and deserved his hemlock? Wow. So I mean, look at this rhetorical. I mean, this is why Nietzsche is famous for his writing in German. It's like his rhetorical power is unbelievable. So he rolls attack after attack. I'm going to attack Plato, but then say he's the finest mind. I'm going to attack Socrates. Maybe he deserved the hemlock, the great crime of antiquity of the classical Greek world, the killing of Socrates for being a philosopher. And then he goes on, but the struggle against Plato, or to speak plainer and for the people, the struggle against the ecclesiastical oppression of millennium of Christianity, for Christianity is Platonism for the people. I mean, wow. Like, okay, I'm going to now expand that attack and go for everyone, basically for all of Christian Europe. I'm just going to go after that. Produced in Europe a magnificent tension of the soul, such as had not existed anywhere previously. So here's his idea. There's been this massive error. This massive error is developed by Plato, extrapolated by Christianity through all of Europe and all through European history. But the error is so great that it's produced this massive tension in society to try and fight back against this error. As a matter of fact, the European feels this tension as a state of distress. And twice attempts have been made in grand style to unbend the bow. Once by means of Jesuitism, and the second by means of democratic enlightenment, which with the aid of liberty and the press, liberty of the press and newspaper reading might in fact bring it about that the spirit would not so easily find itself in distress. So notice, what he's saying here is this error, this fundamental problem, this fundamental tension, this desire for belief in the truth has been attacked twice. Once with Jesuitism, and what he means here is the notion of questioning. So this is the background of a Jesuit education was inquiry, going back again much more to the Socratic style in theory. I mean, in practice, your mileage may vary, but this is the idea, is that the Jesuit religion was one of questioning and interrogation and logic and thinking and reflection. And the second one would be with the free press, democratic enlightenment, newspaper reading. So if we could do that, this might also unbend it, because now we don't have absolute refined truth. We don't have that. We have the views and ideas of the populace. But of course, Nietzsche is not in favor of either of these. But we who are neither Jesuits nor Democrats, nor even sufficiently German. So notice this. I'm not a Jesuit. I'm not interested in all this questioning stuff, although of course he is, nor a Democrat. He certainly is not a populist Democrat who believes in the value of the people. He avoided that trap. Let's be perfectly frank there. Nor even sufficiently German, and this is important because he's always being accused of being this like super Nazi or at least super nationalist. I think no, he was anti-nationalist, anti-German identity the whole time for all the reasons that he's going to explore in this work. We good Europeans and free, this is the key thing, very free spirits, we have it still, all the distress of spirit and all the tension of its bow. And perhaps also the arrow, the duty, and who knows, the goal to aim at. So what he's arguing here is important to recognize is that the tension that the error has created should not be, the bow should not be unbent. This is what the Jesuits and the enlightened Democrats are trying to do. The democratic enlightenment movement is trying to release the tension of the bow without firing an arrow at something. And Nietzsche's like, no. Free spirits, very free spirits, good Europeans who aren't stuck in this nationalist, narrow-minded, very localized view. Maybe what we want is that tension. And we've got the strongest bow that's ever been bent, according to Nietzsche. And what he wants to do is be the arrow and be the arm that fires it at a new goal. This is the work that he's laid out here. So as far as like rhetorical rolling outs of your philosophical work, I mean, full marks. He attacks the idea of the will to truth, as he will talk about here in the first opening, as the philosophers are driven to think about truth in the way they are, not because truth is such an unquestionably good aim, but because of unconscious desires for control and domination, and that it's necessary for us to think this way for various reasons. And he wants to start right there. And he says this error is the error at the heart of Christian civilization, Platonic, which, if you saw my series on the Symposium, you recognize that Plato is Christianity, Christianity is Platonism, right? It's like this weaving together. Again, this was not originally my idea, obviously, Nietzsche articulating that here, that he wants to take all that tension and fire at a new goal. He wants to release the air. He wants to undo it, but not by unbending the bow, but by firing the bow. So here we go. That's his goal. And what is he aiming at? Beyond good and evil. Here's the title. How do you think beyond good and evil? And he says, the will to truth, which is to tempt us to many a hazardous enterprise, the famous truthfulness of which all philosophers have hitherto spoken with respect. What question has the will to truth not laid before us? Right? Okay. And notice how natural it seems. Of course we're trying to be true. Of course we're trying to seek the truth. Of course all this, of course. But Nietzsche goes, what is the value of this will? Granted that we want the truth, why not rather the untruth and uncertainty, even ignorance? The problem of value of truth presented itself before us, or was it we who presented ourselves before the problem? Which of us is the Oedipus here? Which is the Sphinx? It seems to be a rendezvous of question and notes of interrogation. And could it be believed that it last seems to us as if the problem had never been propounded before, as if we are the first to discern it, get a sight of it, and risk raising it? For there is a risk in raising it. Perhaps there is no greater risk. So he's like, wait a second. Where does this will come from for the truth? Question number one. And question number two, where does this notion that we should will the truth rather than, as he says, rather than the untruth? Why shouldn't we will something else? Why do we desire the truth? Again, from the opening. And why do we desire anything in this direction? And when we desire it, why is it the truth that we seem to always be reaching for? And once you ask that question, wow, there's very difficult to put that genie back in the bottle, as it were, because you go, oh, wait a second. Think about, is this argument true? Or do you have evidence for it? Do you have all the supporting for it? Our entire intellectual edifice is built around this notion that it is truth that we should be seeking, not untruth or not other things. And of course, Nietzsche's going to say, nah, probably this is a bad idea. This is just a bad idea that we got corrupted with from Plato, right? And that Christianity is just a working out of this logic for the masses. And it's like, okay, well, what could that possibly mean? And he has this opening here where he says, how could anything originate out of its opposite, blah, blah, blah. And he says, this is the mode of reasoning, the typical prejudice by which metaphysicians of all time can be recognized. This mode of valuation is at the back of all their logical procedures. Through this belief of theirs, they exert themselves for their knowledge for something that is in the end solemnly christened the truth. The fundamental belief of the metaphysician is the belief and antithesis of values. So this is a notion that, black is not white. How do you know that something is good? It's because you consider something bad. And so there's all these antithetical experiences that you compare with each other and that, blah, blah, blah. That we all know this. This is the standard reasoning, standard argumentation. For it may be doubted, firstly, whether antitheses exist at all. So there are no antithetical things. Hello, doubt. He's starting to sound very Taoist, by the way, when he says things like this. We're probably just making this up. This is probably just something we've created. We don't have this separation. And secondly, where the popular valuations of antitheses of value upon which metaphysicians have set their seal are not perhaps merely superficial estimates, merely provisional perspectives, being probably made from some corner below, from a frog's perspective, right? From that notion of we're looking at it from some weird angle. And he goes, no, this idea is simply, he just doesn't believe it, basically. I don't believe that things are antithetical. I don't believe that you're either a sinner or saved. I don't believe that there is a truth and a falsehood. Why would we believe this is true anyway? Like there's so many other ways to look at it, which he then goes on to say, in spite of all the value which may belong to the true, the positive, and the unselfish. So he's saying like, oh yeah, it could be that there's good things in the true. It could be in the positive. It could be good things in unselfishness. It might be possible that a higher and more fundamental value for life generally should be assigned to pretense, to the will, to delusion, to selfishness, to cupidity. It might even be possible that what constitutes the value of those good and respected things consists in precisely in their being insidiously related, knotted, crocheted to these evil and apparently opposed things, perhaps even in being essentially identical with them. Right? And so notice the perhaps, these dangerous perhapses. So what he wants to do is he says, am I the Sphinx interrogating, or am I the Oedipus being interrogated? Am I answering the riddle, or is the riddle answering me? This is from the previous section, of course. I want to explore all these perhapses. I want to know what it would mean to think about that maybe these are the same thing, that these aren't different things, or maybe it's even more valuable to be selfish or delusional. Right? What constitutes the values that we say this is, that we have? And once you ask this question, trouble for philosophy. Philosophy has been in trouble. I mean, philosophy is always in trouble, but this has been a particularly problematic set of questions that no one has really ever functionally responded to that well. Nietzsche probably gave it as good a run as anybody, but you can see that once you've said that there is no final arbiter because there is no, really super, I mean, it's not that truth is bad, it's just that it's not the ultimate value. Once you recognize that, then you go, oh, well, wait a second, then how do we value things? Well, of course, stay tuned for the entire rest of the work because this is what he's doing. But the first thing he's trying to do is get us to be at least suspicious of the category of truth. Like, let's stop worrying about that. So he says, having kept a sharp eye on philosophers and having read between their lines long enough, I now say to myself that the greater part of conscious thinking must be counted amongst the instinctive functions. And it is so even in the case of philosophical thinking. One has here to learn anew, as one learned anew about heredity and innateness. Again, so now wanting us to throw air quotes around truth all the time and recognize that, when we say truth, we may not have the truth we think we do. It may not be valuable in the way we think it is. It may not be opposed to falsehood in the way we think it, right? He's throwing all that out, or at least wanting it to be suspended and open to question. He then says, hey, when we start thinking, how do we know whether or not our thinking is real thinking, which he thinks does not happen very often, or simply instinctive? As little as the act of birth comes into consideration in the whole process and procedure of hereditary, just as little is being conscious opposed to the instinctive in any decisive sense. The greater part of conscious thinking of a philosopher is secretly influenced by his instincts and forced into definite channels. And so he says, even when philosophers are arguing for truth and think they found truth, and the metaphysicians are making, what they're really doing is articulating instinctive and necessary ideas that come to the fore, regardless of their questioning, regardless of their logic, regardless of their valuations. It all becomes expressed because they can't help themselves. For example, he says that the certain is worth more than the uncertain, that illusion is less valuable than truth. Such valuation, in spite of their regulative importance for us, might, notwithstanding, be only superficial valuations, special kinds of sort of weaknesses, such as may be necessary for the maintenance of beings such as ourselves. Supposing, in effect, that man is not just the measure of things. Oh my goodness, right? So he's just attacking everything here. Everything. Like, okay, even if it has some value for us, he's very clear here. Like, this might be good for us. That the illusion is less valuable than the truth, that might be, some have importance to us. But why are we the measure of things? Why does our instinctive expression of this be taken for truth, which itself we're not very interested in, it turns out, or at least we should be suspicious of? And you're like, oh my goodness. So he's just clearing the decks here he's clear cutting basic. He's trying to just open up a totally new ground on which to plant his seeds, which is in section 4. And that's where we'll wrap up today because it's a lot. And I'll have to go back through the whole thing step by step so we can see what he's doing. But here he's saying, so first we have sort of all of Western philosophical history is based on an error, and that's okay because it's given us tension that I'm going to use to launch an arrow towards a goal, which we'll see very soon. But Christianity, mistake, Platonism, mistake, all this is just a big error. Okay. Belief in truth, and in fact, the notion of the truth itself, probably simply not the kind of thing we think it is and just unhelpful and blinding. So let's get rid of that, or at least put it in suspension. And now to say, even when we think we're thinking about things, even thinking about things like thinking about what we mean when we say the truth is not valuable, even that might simply be an expression of sort of instinctual drives, not really thinking. So the goal of the foundation of thinking, the philosophical history of Western philosophy, he's cutting that away. The goal of thinking, as generally framed, to discover the truth, he wants to get rid of that. The grounds of thinking, that when we think we're doing something that's not just beastly and instinctual, but actually some higher order. So you see what I'm saying? It's like a multi-dimensional total space clear out. Like I'm undercutting everything I can all at once. So in 3 short paragraphs plus an introduction, he's just pulled everything apart, but in this aphoristic style, which again, I'll return to in just a second. Let me do section 4, and then we'll kind of wrap up for today because good Lord, this is plenty. So 4, the falseness of an opinion is not for us any objection to it. It is here perhaps that our new language sounds most strangely. The question is, how far an opinion is life-furthering? Life-preserving, species-preserving, perhaps species-rearing. And we are fundamentally inclined to maintain that the falsest opinions, to which the synthetic judgment a priori belong, so this is him taking throwing a rock at Kant right there, are the most indispensable. That without a recognition of logical fictions, without a comparison of reality with the purely imagined world of the absolute and immutable, without a constant counterfeiting of the world by means of numbers, man could not live. That the renunciation of false opinions would be a renunciation of life, a negation of life. To recognize untruth as a condition of life. That is certainly to impugn traditional ideas of value in a dangerous manner, and a philosophy which ventures to do so has thereby alone placed itself beyond good and evil. But, right. So 3 paragraphs of get rid of what was and what is. Like, what is he aiming at? What is the goal he mentions with this bent bow that he wants to fire at? The falseness of opinion is not for us any objection to it. It is here perhaps that our new language sounds most strangely. The question is, this is the new value, how far an opinion is life-furthering, life-preserving, species-preserving. That's the measure. Does it give life power? Does it increase life force? Does it preserve life? Does it help the species, the human species he's interested in here? But you know, you can, and some people have taken this and said, hey, if you put an environmental spin on this, it's like, oh, does this idea, this opinion, this outlook further the diversity and wellness of life on the planet? If yes, then Nietzsche is going to say, well, then it's a good idea. It's a definitional thing. We don't care if it's true. We care if it's life enhancing. Does it invigorate us? Does it give us power? Does it provide greater pleasure? Does it make our world a better, more vibrant, more living place? If yes, then then we don't care if it's true. We care if it does that. It's a functional definition, not an absolute definition. And we are fundamentally inclined to maintain that the falsest opinions, like Kant's idea of the a priori, are the most indispensable to us. Like, we really need wrong opinions to get about our business. Like, we absolutely need this. that we continually compare reality with purely imagined world of the absolute and the immutable seems to help us. It seems to have this generative impact upon how we behave. And so he's not saying he's against falsehood. He's not saying he doesn't want to prove that it's right. He wants to decide whether or not it's life-enhancing. And if it is life-enhancing, then great, right? To recognize untruth as a condition of life. This invocation is, notice that it's like, wait a second. How do we recognize untruth as a condition of life? And what does he mean by that? And why does it place one beyond good and evil? It places you beyond good and evil in this instance because good and evil are varied against various incarnations of truth compared to absolute values, Plato, or Christian values, Platonic Christianity, and then back-figured. And Nietzsche's like, no, that's the wrong way to do it. What you want to do is go the other direction. You want to say, does this enhance life? Does this make it powerful? Then we don't care. And in so doing, we don't care whether or not it's true. Just reverse the reasoning, and all of a sudden you find out that, well, it doesn't matter. So a big preamble, and this is fundamentally, this is the ground he's going to work out for the rest of the work, is introduction. Again, all of Western philosophical history is built on an error, but that's okay, but just wrong. Traditional means of trying to get rid of that error are unhelpful and misleading, and certainly he has no interest in being a Jesuit or a Democrat of any kind. And so, problem number one. Problem number two, the categories with which that philosophical tradition have been focused on, truth and untruth, good and evil, righteous and unrighteous, accurate and inaccurate, those are all preposterous and open to question and probably should not be embraced in any way, and certainly not unthoughtfully embraced with them. And three, the notion that thinking, hello Plato, is somehow removed from and above the instinctual activities of the human species, utterly wrong, that it is necessarily a part of, and necessarily an expression of our instincts and our unconscious or subconscious desires. So it cannot be set on a separate, pure pedestal of absolute reason in any sense. Hello, Kant, by the way, the critique of, this is Nietzsche simply reproducing Kant in a very much more readable fashion, if nothing else. So So how do you backfill all that space that he just created for us? Well, you start by asking a different set of questions, and you start by asking it in a different set of ways. So first he says, let's ask, is it life enhancing? Now what that means, we'll see, this will develop, but it's a different question. And notice people say, oh, Nietzsche isn't a systematic thinker. This is a bunch of isolated, little epigrams or paragraphs that aren't super well coherent argument, all these sorts of things. What is thus spake Zarathustra? It's a narrative. It's not a philosophical. Right. So not only does this work present a challenge to all of these ideas in its content, it also does so in its structure. It's a structural challenge. It's an attempt. So once you start arguing against the nature of truth and logic and absolute being and the suspension of the human mind outside of desires and reason and all these sorts of concepts, how do you translate this out of a format in which you were begged to, almost forced to, reproduce the structure of writing and argumentation that takes all of that for granted? So if you did this in a traditional philosophical work, which has been done, of course, what you end up to is running into this bear that whatever your content, structurally, you're reproducing the same idea. Oh, look, here's a bunch of organized and logical arguments supported by evidence and reason to demonstrate that we shouldn't be seduced by logical argument, evidence, and reason, right? Like this, and you're like, what wins in that is people go, oh yeah, we should question this, but we should question it in a way that reinforces everything. that maintains the superstructure exactly the way it is, which is one of the reasons that he's very suspicious of Jesuitism, because he thinks for all of its questioning and reasoning, it's really just doing this. Also opposed to Christianity, so not a big fan of the Catholic attempt to recapture the Protestant world, let us say. Not a fan of that concept, old Nietzsche. And so we're presented with a difficult work in that every aspect of this is challenging, not least of which the form it's presented in. But this is quite necessary. And I just finished reading a critical biography of Baudrillard's work, and reading Baudrillard and some of Baudrillard's, or attempting to read some of his later works. And this is one of the things that he was clearly struggling with. Like, how do you write a work that doesn't just simply get reconsumed by the very forces that he's trying to critique? And the answer is you write, or at least for Baudrillard, the answer was you write these very, very strange works, but they're necessarily strange because you're trying to do this, right? Like it goes with that. And so it becomes weird to us because like, what is he doing? I don't really know what he's doing. You're like, right, because he's trying to do something in a way that is uncomfortable. And it's a way that try to force us out of the general conceptions that we have about the world. Nietzsche is doing the same thing here. Nietzsche understands perfectly well, better than anybody on the planet, basically. I mean, he was a brilliant scholar and philosopher and writer. He knew how to write a philosophical work that everybody would applaud and think was great. He just couldn't bring himself to do it. And part of the reason he couldn't bring himself to do it is because he's arguing against that whole system. He's opposed to the structure that is imposed on writing itself. The way narratives are written, the way arguments are made, the way logic is deployed. And so you have to write this sort of bastardized work because you have to communicate to those people something, but you don't want to do it in a way that's super easy for them to consume because otherwise then you're just reproducing the structure. And it's like, oh, rats, right? Like he's doing the anti Malcolm Gladwell. So Malcolm Gladwell has this great ability to present absurd ideas that in a way that is popular and people eat it up. It's so easy for them because it reinforces everything they already believe and makes them feel good about themselves. And they're so reasonable and they're so easy and the arguments are so pleasing and it's all great and it's wonderful and they're bestsellers. And Nietzsche's like, yeah, I don't want to do that. I want to do the opposite. I want to write things that make you uncomfortable, that are difficult, that challenge, but they don't just challenge in the content, they challenge in the form. And so I guess that's the fourth dimension or fifth dimension. Yeah, I guess so there's 5 dimensions he's attacking us on. 1, all of Western philosophical history and Christianity is based on an error, but that's okay. Again, this is a weird thing. It's all wrong, but that's okay that it's wrong because it's given us this tension, and I'm working with it, so that's great. 2, our fundamental belief in the philosophical world, at least, and the world more generally, that you want the truth or you want to be accurate is probably an error derived from the previous error. Again, imagine the multiple choice test, like which is the correct answer. If you say, I'm really not sure correct answers have any particular value, like, that sort of formal test becomes impossible because you're like, well, it doesn't matter which one you mark. Like the marking of them is an arbitrary performance that I don't believe in. So yeah, we don't want to get rid of truth in that sense. So that's number 2. Number 3 is that when we think we're doing something that is not biologically determined, not a matter of our instincts, not an outcome of our world that we're implanted in. And he's like, yeah, no, that's absolutely clearly not true. Like, no, this is an expression of our own biographies. This is an expression of our own experiences, of our desires, all of this, all wrapped up in there. And that's not bad. Like, again, he's not saying that's bad. He's just saying that, like, come on, let's be clear here. This is what we're doing. So like, wow. So he tries to get rid of this world of, clear, absolute reason and like just elimination of perspective, all that. He's like, let's just get rid of that. Like, okay, let's forget about that. Let's think with our desires. Let's think with our bodies. Let's do all that. 4, he gives us a new goal, a new value. He's trying to present a new value, which is not truth. Falseness of opinion is no objection for us. He's trying to give us a new measure, a new metric, and that metric is, which is not articulated very clearly yet, is it life-preserving? Is it life-enhancing? True, false, I don't care. Life-enhancing, yes. Good, evil, don't care. Life-enhancing, yes. It's a new sort. So get rid of all those old values, get rid of all of your tradition, get rid of the way you think about how you think. Here's a new value for you, and I'm going to present all this in a mode that doesn't follow the rules for how one makes arguments. Because, of course, how could you when you've had those four concepts already in 4 paragraphs? So, well, I think we'll take a break there. Is that enough for today? I feel like that's enough for today. So this is just the first 4. So, I mean, we're only like, 2.5, 3 pages in, depending on the version you're using. I mean, we're nowhere. And it's like, holy shit, Nietzsche, what are you doing? Like, oh my God, this is why he's so great. He's just rolling this out there in this bizarre format and asking us to play along. And I think it's very much worth playing along because it's so fundamental, it's so focused, and it's so clear, by the way. Again, his writing is very clear. It's not confusing. What's confusing is that he's saying things that run counter to our expectations. Again, he's the anti-Malcolm Gladwell. He's saying things that make us go, what? And he says it in a way that makes us go, what? Because it runs counter to our own prejudices and our own preconceptions. And so as an experiment, just again, I love to give experiments, a little homework. I can't help myself. Someday I'll be back in a classroom and I'll be able to give homework, and maybe I won't have to give it to all the time. But a little homework assignment here is, as you go through the next, whatever week or so, see how often people try to appeal to the truth or the right or what's real, simply to reinforce some preconception, some feeling, some instinct, some desire that they have. That really, and it's like, look, the desire is fine, whatever is all great. Why do you want to gild it in this sort of box of, oh, this is a transcendent absolute truth? Of course, people don't usually express it that way. But, it is this desire to frame things in this. Even with people who've never read philosophy, this is nothing about having philosophical background or articulating it within the concepts of philosophy, is an expression of our cultural drive to think of things as being good or evil, as being right or wrong, as being true, as being real, as being the correct. And then once you abandon that, or once you recognize it and start working against it, you're like, well, why should you do this? Like, because it feels good? It's life enhancing? It feels life enhancing. I'm going to go with it because it feels life enhancing. That kind of argument or framing, it's just really off-putting for people. It really, and honestly, I've run this experiment. You can run it too. I'm going to run it too just because, I'm playing along here. It's great. It is such to me, it's very evocative because it always brings to the fore how deeply ingrained this process of truth-seeking, absolute valuation, reason, thinking outside our bodies really is. Not that we do any of this, right? We don't behave this way, but we frame what we do as if we were behaving this way. And that's part of the great tension. But again, he doesn't want to unbend the bow. He doesn't want to get us to live in coherence with all of this. He wants to shoot towards a new target. And the new target is, of course, life enhancement. So, reading along with Nietzsche, that was only about 2.5 pages. Wow, here we go. Thank you.